The Giants reportedly made a late run at a power-hitting first baseman, and while on the surface it may seem disappointing and like they missed out again, but in my opinion, this was a deal where even if they had signed the player, fans were going to complain about the deal.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on the show we provide episodes 3 days a week for now, back to 5 starting in February 1st, as a matter of fact, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since way back in 2015. Been podcasting I've been doing Locked On Giants now, coming up on 5 years. Can you believe it? This is going to be 5 years in a couple months. I forget where I was there, but thanks for making us your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. And coming up on today's show, as I said, there was a player that was signed by another team, and then John Heyman, who, notorious for arson judge, he wrote, this is all he said, quote, "They made a late play for Hoskins, so we'll assume they still seek a hitter," end quote. So that's, and then you see headlines like Giants made a, quote, late play for Rhys Hoskins. And so Hoskins is an interesting player. We've talked about him on this show several times. Basically, you can't be mad about this one. You can't be like, they missed out again, because the deal that he got, if the Giants had signed him to this deal, this is exactly the type of deal that they've done over and over that has made people angry. The 2-year deal with the opt-out after the first year. We have seen it over and over. Carlos Rodon and Michael Conforto most recently, and we see when it works and when it doesn't work. And Rodon, he was great. People call it a lose-lose, but it was, they didn't lose. Rodon being great wasn't a loss, was it? No, it was a win. But the lose part is that if he's good, he leaves, opts out at least, and he did. Went to the Yankees and struggled. But then Conforto, if the performance isn't there, then you get stuck with them and they come back. And so this is the deal that Rhys Hoskins got from the Brewers. And so for the Giants, Susan Slusser kind of clarified this. What she says in an article for the Chronicle is, quote, "The Giants made a minor run at Rhys Hoskins, the former Phillies slugger from Sacramento, but the offer wasn't close to Milwaukee's, according to industry sources. Hoskins agreed to a 2-year, $34 million deal with the Brewers. That includes an opt-out after the first year, something the Giants are trying to avoid after agreeing to numerous such deals the past few years. Considering Hoskins missed all of 2023 season with a torn ACL, an opt-out is a no-brainer for the 30-year-old slugger as he rebuilds his market value after recovering from knee surgery," end quote. And so I just 100% read that paragraph and reread that paragraph if you're in the mindset like they missed out again. They have literally been saying they're trying to, because they recognize fans are not happy with it, and this is a business, and the business is to entertain the fans, and people don't like the 2-year deal with the opt-out. We've seen it over and over with this regime, and people are sick of it. And this is, from Rhys Hoskins' perspective, this is the deal that makes sense. These deals make sense for that's why they get them. The Giants, they made sense for the player. That's why the Giants were able to sign these players on these deals. And so for Hoskins, he goes to a great hitters park, and he rebuilds his value. And if he has a monster season, he could be $100 million+ player. And so when she says the Giants' offer wasn't close, I'm gonna guess that we're talking average annual value here versus total money. Unless, I don't know, because if they're trying to avoid the deal with the opt-out, the only other thing I can think of is that they just offered him a straight 1-year deal, but that doesn't really make sense to me. I kind of think maybe they offered him a multi-year deal here, but that it was a lower average annual value. And so for Hoskins, that doesn't make sense. The deal that he signed makes sense because it guarantees him 2 shots basically at having a big season and then re-entering the market. And so it's beneficial for the player. You have to think of it from the player's perspective. And from the Giants' perspective, you're not going to pay full price for a guy who's missed a whole season with a torn ACL. And so you're offering him, less than what he could be worth if he goes out and has a monster season in 2024. And so I just think this is kind of a non-story. What the story of it is that they were trying to, make a run at Rhys Hoskins, which is interesting because it would create a serious logjam at first base because, Lamont Wade Jr. and right now, actually, when you look at the depth chart, they kind of don't have it's not quite complete. They need, I think, if you were to sign a third baseman like Matt Chapman or something, that would move JD Davis over into the platoon role at first or as kind of an everyday DH. Wilmer Flores and JD Davis kind of interchangeable there in that first base DH role. Wilmer has a lot more experience defensively at first base and is pretty solid defensively at first base, not anywhere else, but at first base, yes. So the fact that, I kind of turn back to what Jon Heyman said. He said they made a late play. This was in an article that was about big market teams that are still active. And number 2 team for him was the Giants. And he said they made a late play for Hoskins, so we'll assume they still seek a hitter. And I believe Hoskins was another Scott Boras client. And Jon Heyman is notoriously known for being kind of a mouthpiece for Scott Boras. He's also a legit reporter, but he kind of pushes. They've got some kind of relationship where Heyman will tweet or write things that kind of Boras wants him to tweet or write. Is pretty clearly established. It's easy to see. So anyway, coming up in just a minute, we're going to switch gears a little bit because within this Susan Slusser piece, she talks about, she's her whole point was that they need power. And she says who their top position player target is, because let's not forget, there are many top free agents from this class who are still unsigned as we are almost in February. So it's just one of those years that's been really slow. But who is their top position player target? And then later on, we'll get to, does a pitcher make more sense at this point? Or both? That's what I keep saying. Why not both? All right, so we'll get into it in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. If I had an extra $100 in Vegas, and if I was there for the big game, what would I do? Get a great dinner? Put it all on red? For me, I would probably play Texas Hold'em with that extra $100 because that is the one game I know how to play, and it's not just luck. And a lot of statistics in Texas Hold'em in poker. And so that's what I would do. And Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when they buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the best price guarantee, which is my favorite thing personally. If you find tickets in the same section at row for less, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Right now, all Game Time users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Game Time app and use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, here we go. We're going to get into what Susan Slusser had to say about the Giants' top position player target. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Coming up, today is Saturday, and coming up next week, we hit February next week? We do, and so it's still 3 episodes next week, and then back to 5 the following week, and all the way through the end of until December, we're back to 5 days a week. And so we've got mailbag questions. Hopefully some signings start happening. I really, truly do think the Giants are not done. They're definitely not done. Their roster isn't finished. And so at some point, we're going to be breaking down moves that the Giants make. It's just, for me, it's a matter of when, not if. So that's coming up hopefully next week. I'm as sick as anyone of the slow off season. But getting back into the Slusser article, she's pretty critical of the Giants, and I guess that it's fair in a way, but I'm just more like, what her point ultimately is that they can't, that they should be more aggressive, basically, with this remaining class of free agents instead of waiting around and potentially missing out. They just need to make the leap and make the deal. And I guess I agree. I just have belief that they will, with at least one of these 4 players who are the top 4 remaining, indisputably, pretty much, with Chapman, Matt Chapman, Cody Bellinger, Blake Snell, and Jordan Montgomery. There are certain players in there that I think are more likely than others to be Giants. One pitcher in particular, one position player in particular. But, at some point, these guys are going to feel the heat a little bit as well. And so I just think it's obvious they're asking for crazy prices. If they haven't signed, it's not I don't just point to the Giants alone and say, you need to do more. All 30 teams are not signing these guys. There's got to be a reason for it, right? And so that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I'm also of the mind that they cannot afford to have. She mentions in the article, and I really hope it's not true. She says maybe they view the 2024 season as a write-off and plan to go all in on Juan Soto next offseason. That's not a good plan, because what if you miss on Soto? They missed on Judge, and they missed on Ohtani and Yamamoto. You can't just punt on a season. And so I don't think that's the case. They understand. I think they need to improve. And that's why I say, why not both when it comes to there's 2 good position players left and there's 2 good pitchers. Get one of each. That's my take. And then maybe fill out, maybe pick up a bullpen piece or something. But they also need to address shortstop. But Slusser points out which of those, she clarifies what was speculation on kind of my part, who the Giants' top position player target is at this point. And what she says is, President of Baseball Operations Farhan Zaidi is looking to upgrade the defense yet again, which means third baseman Matt Chapman is the team's top position player target. And so that kind of seems like an assumption rather than a inside information type sentence, by saying they're looking to upgrade the defense, which Farhan Zaidi has said out loud in public, to the media. And so to say which means Matt Chapman is the top position player target, I don't know that that's true. I have done episodes on Matt Chapman many times. I've been torn many times on Chapman, and honestly, like a lot of it depends on the deal for me, and that's why you don't just go out there and give him 8 years and $200 million. I think this is more of a player where I would want 4 years. ESPN's Kylie McDaniel, who's been pretty good at making contract predictions. I think his prediction was 4 years, 90 million, which is 22. What math is hard when it's 22.5 million a year, right? Something like that. 90 divided by 4. Yeah, got it. 22.5 million a year. I mean, that would be a solid deal. For the age is a concern for me with Chapman, and it's also a concern with me for Snell, and we'll talk about Snell a little bit later, but I don't know. I just think Matt Chapman is a fit because, like I said, if you look at the current roster, like JD Davis kind of projects at third base. I get like maybe you don't want to block Casey Schmitt for like 4 years. If you sign a Matt Chapman, you've kind of blocked Casey Schmitt. And I get it. You prefer the like proven performance of a Matt Chapman over the uncertain performance of a Casey Schmitt. In fact, it was quite miserable at times at the plate for him. He finished pretty strong. I think he hit a couple homers in his last game. So, but if you think about it, like you've got JD Davis and say Casey Schmitt in the mix, Schmitt can be optioned. So that's not really an issue. But then at first base, you've got Lamont Wade basically against right-handed pitching, but he is a platoon player, and they're going to platoon him. Even Bob Melvin is going to platoon Lamont Wade Jr. And the numbers bear it out. Like he just doesn't hit lefties well. And so it's like, okay, who's the right-handed side there of that platoon? I suppose if Schmitt is on the roster, you could have Schmitt play third and Davis play first in that scenario when there's a lefty on the mound. But Schmitt, is an unproven commodity. And you could say, oh, it's Wilmer Flores. But then I would say, who's the DH in that case? Who's the DH against a left-handed pitcher? It's not Michael Conforto. He's a guy you might not want even being in the starting lineup against a left-handed pitcher, given what we saw last year from him against lefties. And so adding a Matt Chapman to third base and just like there's your everyday third baseman guy, consistently posts, 600 plate appearances in pretty much every season of his career that was a full season, except last year at 581, close, but missed a little bit of time, played 140 games last year. So if you put him at third, suddenly first base becomes like Wade and Flores, and then JD Davis can kind of just hang out in the DH spot and hit. And he kind of wore down as the season went on, and maybe staying off the field a little bit. I don't know how open he is to that. Some players don't like it. It obviously it would hurt his value. So there's potentially some conflict there that you probably wouldn't see bubble to the surface, but I'm sure he wants to play third base. But Matt Chapman would be an upgrade pretty clearly, I think. But it's there are red flags with Matt Chapman. That's the thing about all of these 4 remaining top free agents. They're all Boris clients. None of them are perfect. They've all got some kind of thing you can say that where you point to and you say, yeah, but. And Blake Snell is no exception. Blake Snell, though, the more I think about it, like he, to me, is the best of these 4 remaining players, and pitching and defense. And I say, go get them both. Go get Matt Chapman, defense at third, elite. Go get Blake Snell, pitching. Boom. You're suddenly looking at a much improved roster. And so coming up in just a minute, I'm going to make the case for Blake Snell, and that maybe he is the best fit of all of all the remaining players for the San Francisco Giants. So we'll get into that in just a second. And before we do, today's episode is brought to you by our very good friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season is wrapping up. Oh my goodness, do the 49ers have a big game tomorrow playing for a chance to go to the Super Bowl. So there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Win or lose, $150 in bonus bet. So I'm pulling up the odds for this game tomorrow in Santa Clara. Niners are favorites at -375. The spread, Niners favorites at -7.5 points. The over-under at 51.5. Place a $5 bet on any of that, and win or lose, you get $150 in bonus bets at FanDuel.com/lockedon. So just do it. I mean, FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, here we go. We're going to make a case. I mean, just discuss, really, that Blake Snell would make the Giants significantly better. And when you look at that starting rotation, we kind of looked at some pitcher projections in a couple days ago, and they're interesting to look at. But when you break it all down, I mean, part of what's going on here is the Giants have two prominent pitchers on the injured list who are going to, start the season on the injured list and probably miss about half the year. I think Alex Cobb is kind of doing well in his recovery from hip surgery and may be in line to return before the All-Star break. But Robbie Ray, from what I read recently, around the All-Star break is like a best case scenario. And so essentially, like, think about the start. I'm just thinking about the start of the season. You got to think about, okay, what are you looking at to start the season? And right now we're looking at Logan Webb, obviously at the top. And then it's a bunch of not question marks, like Ross Stripling has a track record, but was horrible last year. Kyle Harrison is a top prospect, but is a young, unproven player. Jordan Hicks, they signed. I like that deal. I like that he's only 27, but he's starting for not the first time in his career, but he's normally been a reliever. And so that is kind of an unproven thing. You've got Keaton Wynn in the mix. You've got Tristan Beck in the mix, Sean Jelly, openers, stuff like that. And so it, to me, looks like an incomplete pitching staff. You've also on the 40-man got Kaiwei Tang, and then there's, they've got some young talent behind him too, behind those, all the names I've mentioned, like Mason Black and Carson Wisenhunt, Landon Roop, Hayden Birdsong, and others. So there's a lot of young pitching talent coming, but at the same time, like, if you just add in a Blake Snell with Logan Webb, just thinking about how much better that looks, like you could go Logan Webb, Blake Snell, Jordan Hicks, Kyle Harrison, and then like Keaton Wynn or Tristan Beck, whoever's kind of pitching better, and with all that young talent behind them. So I feel like they're one starter short, and Blake Snell just makes so much sense. The one kind of thing is that he walks a lot of guys, and that's not typical of a Giants target, except the exception I'm going to mention is that they just signed Jordan Hicks, who has the same issue. And so maybe it's not a deal breaker as it kind of maybe looked like. So Snell, he's just going to go out there and strike out 30% of batters. That's just like what he does. And that's really high. I mean, league average for pitchers is like 22.5% ish. And he's at 30. And so way above average strikeout rate. Like, what that means is that every 10 hitters he faces, he strikes 3 of them out. And, it's better to look at strikeout rate like that than Ks per 9, because that number is affected by, you could allow, like, you could face 18 hitters in an inning. And that would, by definition, be a horrible inning. A bunch of runs will have scored. And if you strike out 3 in the inning, it's like, great, but you didn't pitch well in the inning, and your strikeout rate wasn't high, only 3 out of 18. Whereas if you strike out 3 out of 3 and end the inning, your strikeout rate is 100, which is it couldn't be higher, but your Ks per 9 is exactly the same at how many 27 Ks per 9 it would be if you struck out everybody. Right? Yeah. Okay. So anyway, the point is that was just a tangent about statistics and metrics in baseball, but Blake Snell, I mean, lefty to pair with Webb, and then you look at, okay, what's the rotation looking like once Cobb and Ray come back if you were to add a Blake Snell? And so all of a sudden you might be looking at one of the best starting rotations in baseball, if not the best. If you had Logan Webb, Blake Snell, by the way, in that iteration where I added Snell, we didn't even get Stripling in there, and so that's kind of a good thing in my mind, although, you know, he can be in that mix. But let's say people come back healthy. Logan Webb, Blake Snell. I'm going righty-lefty here. Webb, Snell. Who do I want to go with? Cobb. And then Robbie Ray is your number 4 starter. And then Jordan Hicks, you know, number 5. That doesn't even leave room, though, for guys like Kyle Harrison and Keaton Winn and Tristan Beck. And so that's kind of the downside, is that you maybe don't have room to give your young players opportunities. So that's where it gets a little tricky. But at the same time, like, people get hurt. You never know, like, maybe Jordan, or you move Jordan Hicks back to the bullpen. Maybe that experiment doesn't work, and et cetera, et cetera. But basically, there's a really good pitcher out there. He just won the Cy Young Award in the National League. Webb finished second. You could literally have the number 1 and the number 2 Cy Young finishers in your rotation. You just got to go out there and pony up the cash. And so I'm kind of with Susan Slusser in this regard, and just, you know, saying ultimately at the end of the day, it is a worth, like, just spend the money, because the product hasn't been good enough on the field the last 2 years, not at all. It's been tough to watch. The fans are angry and, worse, like, disinterested in a lot of ways. Not everyone, but, you know, by and large, this is the feeling around, like, if I talk to people about the Giants who aren't really locked on Giants, so to speak, or, you know, for lack of a better phrase, they're just like, oh yeah, they stink, don't they? You know, that's where people are at with the Giants. And I tend to be optimistic. I think a lot of things have gone wrong the last couple seasons, but also roster building. I mean, it just hasn't been aggressive enough. And they tried, you know, they tried to get Correa, they tried to get Judge, they tried to get Ohtani, they tried to get Yamamoto. I'm excited about Jung-Hoo Lee, but I don't think that they can be done. Like, their offseason cannot be, like, done at this stage. Otherwise, we are looking at another probably mediocre team. But if you were to go out there and get a Blake Snell and a Matt Chapman, you would elevate yourself to one of those legitimate, like, teams in the wild card picture. I think it's going to be hard for any team to consider themselves kind of up there with LA after the offseason they've had. But, you know, the way it is now, you just kind of have to get into the dance, and these wildcard teams have had a lot of success kind of being underdogs and taking down the teams that get the first round bye. But it does mean you risk, you know, your season is at risk in a best of 3 series. So I don't love the new playoff format. That's kind of a tangent as well. But, you know, for the Giants, that's what they're looking at, is like every year, unless you pull off a miracle like 2021 and somehow overtake LA in the division, you're looking at a wild card round. You're looking at a 3-game series, maybe 2, like a best of 3, to determine your whole season. That's what you're playing for. And so pitching is huge in that scenario, right? Because in a 3-game series, if you have Webb and Snell and whoever's pitching best out of, like, Cobb and Ray and Hicks and Harrison, that's what puts you in position to win a playoff series, which this team has not done since 2014. that just like dawns on me. This is 2024. That was 10 years ago, the last time they won a playoff series. Oh, just kidding. In 2016, they won a wild card game, which counts. I forgot. I remember they lost to the Cubs in the DS. I was there for the final game. It was brutal. 3-run lead in the ninth that they blew. Anyway, but they did Connor Gillespie, Mets, Syndergaard, Bumgarner. Bumgarner, of course, threw a freaking complete game shutout. So, yeah, that was wild times. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers. Next week, we're going to be hopefully talking about some action, but also, if not, we've got mailbag questions and we've got all the things to keep you entertained and just the latest rumblings. There's always rumblings, and we'll have that for you. But hopefully actual news. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Once again, my name is Ben Caspick. Check me out on Twitter, X, at Ben Caspick, Kaspick. If you like the show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and really, truly thank you so much to everyone who's done so already. I read the reviews, so I really appreciate the kind ones and ignore the negative ones. That's just, you got to. Anyway, thank you so much again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.